And here we go.
Welcome to the Great Work Insights Podcast by the O.C. Tanner Institute, the show that features the people, the professionals, the thought leaders, and the coolest companies. And now your host, the man navigating the discussion about the culture, the organized chaos, and the best practices that compel great work, Todd Nordstrom.
If you're looking for a job in the United States, apparently now is the time to find one. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, there were 5.5 million job openings as of September of 2015. Predictions show that trend will continue into 2016. That's good news. Of course, with those kind of numbers, that also means that many of you listening to this show today aren't currently looking for a job, but instead you're on the other side. You're competing to hire new talent in 2016. I was thinking about this the other day, the shifts in the job market. I remember the late 1990s when it seemed like every other advertisement on the radio was attempting to attract applicants. Or we all probably remember when Monster.com seemed to instantly grow into one of the biggest websites. Yes, it's good news to see companies battling to attract talent, but what does it mean in the big picture? Does it mean employers need to be the cool companies? Do we need more beanbag chairs, on-site gyms, and foosball tables? Or does it mean something else? How does an employer figure out how to attract the best talent? My guest today can share some insight, not because she's built cool cultures or developed brilliant recruitment ads or because she can get you a stellar deal on a ping pong table or something of that nature. No, my guest today actually has inside knowledge on the other side of the table. She's been studying the wants, needs, and expectations of the future job seekers. Please welcome our guest today, Dr. Marcie LePine, Associate Professor of Management at W.P. Carey School of Business at Arizona State University. Dr. LePine, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Todd, and please call me Marcie.
Okay, I will. Marcie, I'm thrilled to have you on the show today. For the listener's sake, I just want to share the fact that you and I were just introduced not too long ago. We had scheduled a brief introductory phone call, and the next thing we knew, we were swapping stories and studies and survey results and rambling on and on and on. Before we dive into a discussion about what business school students expect from employers, can you give the listeners an overview of the curriculum you teach at W.P. Carey?
Certainly. I primarily teach management and organizational behavior classes. I taught management to our undergraduate Barrett Honor students for years, and I currently teach organizational behavior for our online MBA program and Master's in Management program. So really I've taught a mix of undergrad and graduate students throughout the years.
So you're right up close and personal with all these students, get that firsthand knowledge of what they want and expect. Let's back up for a second to our original phone conversation. I became really intrigued by something you told me on the phone, that you have been surveying and studying the wants and expectations of students based on what they desire from an employer for quite some time. Tell us about that.
My interest in the wants and expectations of student job seekers began back in the 90s when I was an assistant professor at Cornell University. And as you mentioned in your opening, that was an incredible time to be a student job seeker. Students were receiving multiple job offers and had a choice of which company they would work for. And I was interested in that job choice process. And so I began researching what it is that students are looking for in that employment relationship. And so specifically, what they would like their future employer to do or provide for them. So with my team of researchers and through focus groups and surveys, we derived a list of some key factors. Now, at the top of that list were things like advancement opportunities and challenging job opportunities, as well as positive relationships with the people with whom they work. And, of course, during that time, monetary compensation was towards the top of that list. Job security wasn't really on their minds at all.
That's fascinating because I remember, like in the '90s, the late '90s, those ads so clearly, and listening to how each employer would pitch their company to the world. I'm sure a lot of listeners today to today's show, they're managers, they're leaders of companies, they're HR departments, they're recruiters. I know they're all pining to hear what the students of today expect compared to those of the 90s. But before we drop the curtain on what you see from today's business school student, I'd like to hear what the biggest shifts you've seen in the wants and expectations throughout all these years.
Now, what's been interesting to me over the years is the shift from these student job seekers being primarily job and career focused when looking for in the 90s, for example, to being, let's call it, whole person and life focused instead. So I recall a number of interviews with students during the 90s in which men, and to an even greater extent women, especially my business school women, were willing to put their lives on hold for their careers. They wanted to get as far, as fast as they could, and it was all about taking on challenging job opportunities and advancing. And really the number one way to show them respect during this time was to value them for their contributions. So it was pretty clear. They were employees, they were workers, and the relationship was very contractual. You value me for my contributions, pay me for them, and I'll work to the best of my ability. So if you think about that a little bit, today, who are we or what are we today? So you look across a variety of organizations, and in some organizations, it's called a champion or a cast member, an Imagineer or a genius or a Googler. So it's not unusual today to be something more than just that employee. Whether you're called something different or you just think of your role and the role of your employer differently. So this is a shift that I think is in alignment with the wants and expectations of student job seekers today, and it's really been building over the last 8 to 10 years.
That's interesting. There's a lot of talk about generations and their expectations when it comes to work. Obviously, not all of your students belong to the same generation, which obviously our generation is defined by our birth year. Do you think the shifts in expectations that you see are based on changing perspectives of generations, or is it something bigger? Is it something more cultural, that the expectations of the workforce in general are just changing?
I really think it's something bigger. My data suggests that it's beyond just changing perspectives of the generations. So both millennials and Gen Xers are shifting. Millennials are the most noticeable and dramatic, but I'm also seeing it with the Gen Xers. The shift for both of the generational groups began probably around the early to mid 2000s, so this is really the leading edge, or the oldest of the millennials. But the biggest changes really occurred around 2007, 2008 at the time of the economic downturn. According to my data, work engagement was dropping. So we're seeing a lot of changes. And what I saw in my surveys was the beginning of a new perspective on work. So much so that most of my original survey items from the 90s, when I'd asked the students what they would like their future employer or to do or to provide, were no longer relevant. In fact, being valued as a contributor as the number one way an employer could show respect was being replaced.
Huh. Yeah, it's fascinating too, because I'm a Gen Xer by definition, by birth year, and a lot of the people that I grew up with, I've seen their perspective change as well. So it's not just blame it on the millennials kind of thing, is it? Which a lot of people do. Okay, so let's drop the curtain for all those recruiters and HR leaders and managers who are waiting to find out what business school students today want, need, and expect from the workplace. What are the top 3 things, or 4 if you have them? What are the top 3 or 4 things you see today on your surveys?
So first of all, let's start big picture in
Okay.
terms of respect. Respect is something that we all want. Now, over the years, respect has really meant 3 key things to student job seekers. So number 1, being valued as a contributor. Number 2, being valued as a person. And number 3, being treated fairly. All 3 are important, but as you'll see in just a moment, relative importance has changed over time. So in the early 90s in the late 90s, early 2000s, as I just mentioned, being valued as a contributor was number 1 for both millennials and Gen Xers. Now, for the millennials, The change in the 2000s through today has been dramatically. Today, about 65% select being valued as a person as the number one way in which to respect them. And this, again, is over being valued as a contributor and being treated fairly. In fact, being valued as a contributor has dropped all the way to 30%.
Oh, wow.
In the 90s and early 2000s, only 30% of my Gen Xers selected being valued as a person as number one. And during that same time, they were selecting about 60% of them selected being valued for their contributions. Over time, this has shifted as well. And now the number has risen to over 50% who indicate that being valued as a person is the number one way an employer can show respect. So what does this mean in terms of practices that will attract millennials and Gen Xers? I think it's really about building a relationship with your potential and current employees. It's not just about rewarding them for their contributions or looking at that relationship as a contract. So with respect to specific practices across the board and over time for both generations, all generations, advancement opportunities are number one. But to me, what has been most telling is the drop in importance of challenging job opportunities. Now, challenging job opportunities, for those of us who are some of the older Gen Xers, we probably would list this number one or number two. And in fact, in the early 90s or late 90s, early 2000s, challenging job opportunities was always number one or number two along with advancement. That's how we saw ourselves advancing. So what has replaced challenging job opportunities? For the millennials, we see challenging job opportunities has dropped to the bottom of the list. This is not what they're looking for. It's actually changed in how they see these challenges. So now what they're looking for is personal growth. They're looking for a safe environment that allows them to express their ideas, and they want that environment to be positive and welcoming. They want a good relationship with those whom they work with and for. For Gen Xers, we still see challenging job opportunities as somewhat important. In fact, it's still, for the oldest of my Gen Xers, it still shows up in the top 10 list. For the younger Gen Xers, it's about the middle of the list for what's important to them. So what's replaced challenging job opportunities for these Gen Xers? Again, it's personal growth. They want some sort of personal growth from the work that they're doing. And what we also see with Gen Xers is they want personal enjoyment of the work that they're doing, and they want to know that their work is meaningful. They want to make a difference. They want managers who really know them as a person and understand their talents. So really, in a nutshell, to attract both millennials and Gen Xers, you need to learn about and know your potential employees and current employees as a person. Value them as a person. They want movement and growth, or they will leave. I think many of you know that. But this includes lateral movements to them or doing something else that inspires them. Again, it's about the whole person. It's about building a relationship.
That's fascinating. I just, as you were stating those numbers, I was thinking about, as you've been teaching throughout the years, when you see these big events, call it 9/11 or the recession hits and the stock market falls out, when you've been teaching, do you see an immediate change in perspective from people where it's like all of a sudden they're more, it's more about, does this mean something to me? Am I more purpose driven? Do you see immediate changes there at school?
I do. In fact, typically, we're on a semester basis. So when things happen, certainly within that semester, sometimes, or even in the next semester, I see that shift. I see the change happening. So they are reacting to what's happening within the environment. And after 9/11, that's when I saw a slight change. And then between 9/11 and into about 2007 or 2008, a slow change. And then when the recession hit, in 2007. That's when the change became dramatic again. And I think people were really thinking about, what is work to me? What's my life to me? Who am I? Do I want balance? Do I want flexibility in my work? We spend the majority of our lives in the workplace. So they really did begin thinking about that, and it's important to them.
So your advice to that manager or that employer or that leader who's saying, I need to find great people for my company this year, your advice would be listen to the voices of those coming into the workforce?
Certainly. And I would say find ways to build relationships with those people. If it's college recruiting that you're interested in, build relationships with our current students. Get to know them and understand them. And there are a variety of ways to do that. So I think it's important. If you're a manager and you're looking at your current workforce, know and understand your current workforce. That personal growth and meaning is very important to people. So listen to them. Develop a plan. They all want to advance, and they want to know that they can move within that organization. But again, it's not necessarily just moving up in an organization. It's gaining new skills, doing something different. Again, something that will inspire and motivate them.
I love the fact that you said build a relationship too, because I'm just a hunch, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing when you talk to the students in your classrooms, there's probably some anxiety about reaching out to try and build relationships with the employers. So it's probably in the best interest of the employers to build the relationships with the students, correct?
That is definitely correct. And what some organizations have done is they have liaisons on campus. So in terms of building that relationship, they have a student contact and then create relationship building that way. So that's one idea. Even just coming in and talking to our classes, it's another way to put a face to a company and to begin that relationship building. As you mentioned, with the job market picking up again for our students, they will have a choice, and you want your company to be that choice, especially for the best and the brightest.
Fascinating, as always, to speak with you. If listeners want to learn more about you, I know you publish papers and articles, or if they want to learn more about WP Carey School of Business, where can we find you?
They can just go to our website. It's just wpcarey.asu.edu. And at the top of that page, you'll see a search place. Just type in my name, Marcie LePine, MarcieLePine, and it should take you to some links. You'll be able to click on my homepage there, or just feel free to email me. And my email address is marcie.lepine@asu.edu.
Oh, that's kind of you. Thank you so much for joining us, Marcie.
Would you like to be featured as a guest on Great Work Insights? If yes, we want to hear from you. Leave us a comment with who you are and what you're all about at www.octanner.com. Also, remember to rate, review, and subscribe to all our podcasts on iTunes. Now get out there and build something beautiful. It's your turn now.